It's 11:47 p.m. You're lying in bed, phone face up on your chest. The screen is dim. You've already checked it 3 times in the last hour. You open the banking app again. $14.83. Not 14,000, not 1,400. $14.83. And rent is due in 9 days. There's no dramatic moment here. No music swells. No villain appears. This is just your life. Quiet, incremental, suffocating. The worst kind of broke is not the kind people see. It's the kind you carry alone, at midnight, doing math in your head that never adds up. This is where the story starts, not at the beginning of ambition, at the bottom of arithmetic. Level 1, survival. Net worth, negative. Money equals oxygen. The psychology of poverty is not laziness. That's the lie comfortable people tell themselves so they don't have to think too hard about it. The psychology of poverty is bandwidth depletion. When your bank account is near zero, your brain doesn't work the same way. Every decision, every single one, passes through a filter of scarcity. You don't buy groceries, you engineer groceries. You walk the aisle calculating, rice versus pasta, generic versus brand. What can stretch 4 days versus 3? You're not being careful, you're being cognitively exhausted by a problem that should be simple. $14.83 means you've already moved the rent anxiety forward 5 times this week. You've already had the imaginary conversation with your landlord. You've already rehearsed the shame. And then something strange happens. You get paid. Let's say it's $2,200. Direct deposit, Friday morning. For approximately 3 hours, you feel free. And then you start paying for things. Rent, $950. Utilities, $140. Phone, $65. Minimum on the card, $85. Groceries, $200. Transportation, $120. You have $640 left, and 2 weeks until the next paycheck. The cycle doesn't break, it just resets. What people who have never been truly broke don't understand is this. It's not the lack of money that breaks people, it's the relentlessness of it. The fact that there is no day off, no vacation from scarcity. Every morning you wake up, and it's still there, waiting. This level teaches you one thing above all else. Money is not an abstraction. It is survival. It is the difference between the lights staying on and the lights going off, between dignity and humiliation, between staying and leaving. Most people spend their entire lives at this level, not because they lack intelligence, but because no one ever showed them the door. The door exists, but first, you have to want out badly enough to stop pretending the room is fine. Level 2, stability. Net worth, $10,000. Money equals safety. It takes 2 years. 2 years of grinding the same shift, picking up overtime when it's available, saying no to things you want, saying yes to things that pay. You sell the PlayStation. You cancel the subscriptions. You make your lunch every single day for 22 months. And one Tuesday morning, you check the account. $10,247. You stare at it for a long time. This is not a large number. Objectively, rationally, $10,000 is not life-changing wealth. But psychologically, it is seismic. For the first time in your adult life, an unexpected expense would not destroy you. A car repair wouldn't cascade into a missed rent payment. A medical bill wouldn't mean choosing between medication and food. This is the first time money has ever felt like something other than a countdown timer. You open a high-yield savings account. You read 3 articles about index funds, then close the tab out of fear, then reopen it the next week. You watch a YouTube video about compound interest and feel something strange in your chest, something adjacent to hope. But there's also a new anxiety, a different one, losing it. You check the account more than you did when it was empty. The scarcity psychology hasn't left, it's just wearing a different mask. Now, instead of how do I survive, the question becomes, how do I not slide back? This is the threshold moment, because the people who stay at $10,000 are the ones who treat it like a finish line, and the people who leave it behind are the ones who immediately start asking what's next. You put $3,000 into an index fund. Your hands are shaking slightly when you click confirm. This is not investing, not yet. This is practicing belief. The belief that the future is something you can influence rather than something that happens to you. It doesn't feel like freedom yet, but for the first time, it feels like footing. Level 3, competence. Income, $75,000 per year. Money equals comfort, but also a ceiling. 3 years later, you are, by any reasonable measure, doing well. You have a stable job, a salary, health insurance with a real deductible. You contribute to the 401k up to the employer match. You have $40,000 in investments, $12,000 in savings, and almost no consumer debt. People at work respect you. Your manager mentioned trajectory. You went on a vacation, a real one, planned in advance, and didn't check your account once. This should feel like a rival. It doesn't. It feels like a very comfortable trap. Because somewhere between the first paycheck and this one, you opened a spreadsheet, and you ran the numbers, and the numbers said something you weren't ready to hear. At your current salary, contributing 15% annually with average market returns, you will have approximately $1.4 million at age 67. That sounds like a lot, until you account for inflation, until you account for healthcare, until you understand that $1.4 million spread over 25 years of retirement is $56,000 per year before taxes. You're working 40 years to earn approximately what you make now. The math isn't wrong. The math is just honest. And honest math, when you first encounter it, feels like a door slamming. The salary is the problem. Not because it's bad. It's decent. It's stable. But because it has a ceiling, a visible one. You can see exactly where this road ends and what it looks like when you get there. Security, you realize, is not freedom. Security is knowing the shape of your cage. This is the most dangerous level, because most people stay here and call it success. And in many ways, it is success. But it's not the story you were promised at 14, lying awake imagining what your life would become. You start reading differently. You stop reading about budgeting and start reading about ownership, about assets, about the difference between trading time for money and building something that runs without you. The real shift doesn't come later. It starts here, in a spreadsheet, at midnight. Level 4, leverage. Net worth, $180,000. Income, multiple streams. Money equals time. You start the side business on a Saturday. No employees, no office, no pitch deck. Just a service you can provide, a laptop, and the discipline to work 2 hours every night after the day job ends. It makes $400 the first month, then $900, then $1,400. It's not replacing your income yet, but something changes the moment money arrives that you didn't trade a specific hour for. Something changes when the notification comes in on a Tuesday afternoon while you're in a meeting, a sale, a client, a deposit, and you didn't do anything that hour. Time and money start to decouple. This is the first true psychological rupture of the wealth journey. Because for your entire life up to this point, time and money had a fixed relationship. An hour of your life equaled a dollar amount. The equation was linear. Leverage breaks the equation. You buy your first rental property at year 4. A duplex, 40 minutes from the city. You put 20% down, finance the rest, rent both units. After mortgage, taxes, insurance, and maintenance reserve, it nets $420 per month. $420 a month is not wealth, but $420 a month that arrives whether or not you show up to work. That is a category change. You now have 3 income streams: salary, side business, rental. They pull in different directions, require different skills, exist on different timescales. Managing them forces a new kind of thinking. You stop thinking in paychecks and start thinking in portfolios. Your relationship with time shifts. Not dramatically. You're still busy, arguably busier than before, but the quality of your time changes. You start making decisions based on what you want to build, not just what you need to earn. You are not wealthy yet, but you are no longer purely dependent. And dependence, it turns out, was the real poverty all along. Level 5, the threshold. Net worth, $1 million. Money equals proof of concept. The day you cross $1 million in net worth, you're sitting in your car in a parking garage. You refresh the brokerage app. The number reads $1,003,440. You sit with it for a moment. You thought you'd feel something enormous. You thought it would feel like the opposite of $14.83. It doesn't. It feels like relief. And then, almost immediately, like a question. Is this it? The $1 million milestone is psychologically significant because society has assigned it meaning. It is the cultural shorthand for made it. Movies use it as a punchline and a climax. It is the number people say when they say, if I had $1 million. But here's what no one tells you. $1 million is not freedom. It is proof that the system works. It is confirmation that your methods were valid. It is, at current safe withdrawal rates, roughly $40,000 per year in passive income, a comfortable living, but not a different life. The goalpost has moved. You feel it happening in real time, and you can't stop it. This is not greed. This is the oldest trick of human cognition: adaptation. The mind normalizes. What felt impossible becomes ordinary. What felt like an arrival becomes the beginning of a new journey. You notice something else at this level, something subtler. People treat you differently. Not because they know your net worth, they don't, but because the confidence that comes from genuine financial security is visible. It sits in how you speak in meetings, in how you decline things you don't want to do, in the absence of the low hum of anxiety that used to underlie every interaction. You are still the same person, and yet you are not. The real work, the internal work, has only just begun. Level 6. Architecture. Net worth, $5 million plus. Money equals infrastructure. By the time you cross 5 million, you have stopped thinking about money as a number. You think about it as a system. You have a financial advisor now, a real one, fiduciary, fee only, who talks to you about things like asset allocation, tax loss harvesting, estate planning, and trust structures. These conversations would have been incomprehensible at level 1. Now they are the grammar of your daily life. Your investment portfolio has sub-portfolios: liquid, semi-liquid, illiquid. Each bucket has a purpose, a time horizon, a risk profile. You've done your first private deal, a small equity stake in a regional business owned by someone you know from a conference. The check was $150,000. You wrote it without flinching. Something has shifted in how you perceive money at this level. It has weight now, but not the oppressive weight of scarcity. It has the weight of infrastructure, the way a bridge has weight: present, structural, functional. And yet, you begin to notice the social cost. Old friends are harder to reach, not because they've changed, because the distance between your realities has quietly grown. You don't bring up returns or deals, but people sense it, a certain ease you carry now, a certain freedom from the conversations they're still having. You find yourself in rooms with different people who talk about structures and leverage and generational planning, people who measure success not by what they earn, but by what they've built. The loneliness of wealth is the thing no one writes about clearly. Not the absence of people, you have plenty of people, but the absence of understanding, the sense that the full map of your inner life is increasingly difficult to share. You are building something now, not just for yourself, for something beyond yourself. But what? That question takes longer to answer. Level 7. Power. Net worth, $50 million plus. Money equals reach. At this level, money stops being personal. You have a family office, a small team of professionals whose entire job is to manage, protect, and grow your wealth across generations. Your estate plan involves trusts, charitable vehicles, and succession structures. You have attorneys on retainer whose hourly rate would have been your monthly salary at level 1. You sit in a boardroom and the energy is different. You are not pitching, you are being pitched to. There is a distinction. It sounds minor, but it restructures every room you walk into. The person with capital has a kind of gravity. People orbit it. You begin to understand that wealth at this level is not primarily about lifestyle. Your life, day to day, changed far less between $5 million and $50 million than it did between $0 and $50,000. You still drink coffee in the morning. You still have bad days. You still lose sleep occasionally. What's changed is reach. Your decisions now have consequences beyond your household. The companies you invest in employ people. The deals you do reshape small industries. The politicians whose campaigns you support shape policy that affects communities you'll never visit. This is not power in the cinematic sense. No villain's lair, no dramatic leverage. It is quieter and stranger than that. It is the power of having options that don't exist for most people. The power of being able to say yes when others must say no. The power of time, of being able to wait for the right opportunity while others are forced to act. And with it comes a question that money cannot answer. For what? You've spent 15 years building a machine. The machine runs, it compounds, it grows, It will likely outlast you and your children, and possibly their children. But sitting at the center of it, you sometimes feel what you felt at $14.83. Not broke, but searching. The object has changed, the search hasn't. Final level, return, the circular truth. Close your eyes. Go back to the parking garage, the duplex, the spreadsheet, the Friday morning direct deposit that felt like oxygen. Go back to the grocery aisle, the rice versus pasta calculation, the midnight bank app check. That person, the one at $14.83, was not a lesser version of you. They were not incomplete. They were running the exact same operating system you run now. The same fears translated into different stakes. The same desire for security translated into survival math. The money changed. The psychology evolved. But the questions? The questions are the same. What is enough? What is safe? What am I building, and for whom? Does this mean something? Does it last? Here is what the journey actually teaches. Not what the YouTube thumbnails suggest. Not what the books promise, but what the road reveals. Wealth compounds externally, but it also compounds internally. Every decision you made at level 2 changed the way you made decisions at level 4. Every discomfort you sat with in level 3 built the capacity to endure level 6. The discipline was never about money. The discipline was about building a version of yourself capable of handling what came next. And this is the hidden cost no one quotes. The person who crosses from poverty to ultra wealth is not the same person who started. They cannot be. Wealth doesn't just buy things. It reconstructs identity, reshapes relationships, reroutes psychology. The person at $14.83 would not recognize the person at $50 million. Not because the wealth is so different, but because the internal architecture is unrecognizable. What you believed, what you feared, what you thought you deserved, what you thought other people deserved, all of it, rewritten, layer by layer, level by level, dollar by dollar. Money was never just money. It was always a mirror. At level 1, it reflected what you lacked. At level 7, it reflects what you've built. And the gap between those two images is the true story of wealth. Not the returns, not the assets, not the net worth statements. The gap. The distance between who you were and who you became. And here is the thing about that gap. The thing that is both the hardest and the most important. It was always optional. Not the money. Not everyone gets the money. Circumstances, systems, timing, luck all play a role, and honesty requires acknowledging that. But the internal work, the choosing to understand rather than resent money, to study rather than fear it, to build rather than consume, that has always been a choice. The question is never, how do I become wealthy? The real question is, am I willing to become someone different enough to hold it? That question has no shortcut, no course, no guru, no algorithm. It answers itself only in the living. The parking garage, the banking app, the number that used to terrify you and the number that now, somehow, asks the same questions. This is not a story about becoming rich. This is a story about how money reveals the architecture of a human being, under pressure, over time, across every level of want and having. The beggar and the billionaire are not opposites. They are the same person at different chapters, asking the same question. How much is enough? No one gets to answer that for you. If you want to understand how money really changes people, not the fantasy, but the psychology, subscribe. The next video goes deeper.